Hey guys, Alan and Dylan from Two for the Win here, and yesterday we got the latest episode of Samurai Jack, so let's talk about that. We start the episode off with Jack falling down the river, and honestly, this segment of the episode was hilarious. Intentional or not, the way Jack was being carried by the river, and then out of nowhere, a frog jumps next to Jack and screams, "They're coming!" was so funny, and how they were presented that me and Dylan were just dying.
They're coming!
How did you feel about it, Dylan?
I just
You want to add on to that?
I have nothing to add on except they're coming.
Alright.
Jack slowly looks up at the frog and he just has this helpless look in his eye, and then they're coming. It's just like complete shock for the situation,
Yeah.
and then he starts, trying to actually kick and get down the river faster.
Right.
And then the frog just kind of disappears.
It really does. It doesn't appear in any other scene. The next scene I want to talk about is the one where Jack and the lone wolf from the previous episode meet up and end up taking care of one another. I thought this was a pretty touching scene since both of these characters, especially Jack, have gone through so much that both really need a hug at this point.
I thought the wolf was dead for sure. I was surprised to see the wolf come back simply because I thought the wolf was dead. The wolf was in way worse shape than Jack. I mean, Jack was broken more mentally than physically, really. I mean, Jack did get stabbed. He was losing blood. It wasn't good. The amount of blood he lost, though, honestly,
that was way too much blood.
It seemed like he should have died, really.
He really should have died from that much
because he's bleeding all the way down the river, and then in the cave, he's still covered in a ton of blood.
It's probably just our creative.
That was a bit more
stuff.
of artistic liberty, I think, than actually meaning to be the amount of blood he really lost.
Right.
I think it was supposed to be symbolic of they recognized each other's suffering that they had just been through.
Yeah.
Because then when it actually sort of the next day after that, the initial night where the wolf shows up, the next day he's not actually covered in a ridiculous amount of blood. He's still bleeding.
I'm just wondering how the wolf was able to feel enough of a connection with Jack to start helping him out, instead of just eating him when he found him in the cave. I mean, it's a fantasy world, so if a frog can scream, "They're coming!" then anything is possible.
We'll let it slide.
Yeah.
I think it all has to do with the recognition that they had just been through trauma. Yeah. Both of them had.
Right.
They were each bruised. They were each lone wolves in their own way. Not to be trite, but
Yeah. We also get a scene where Jack remembers how his father killed people to protect him and his mother, which finally allows Jack to come to terms with the fact that he killed one of the daughters of Aku. And even though it was done really quickly, I still feel that this was a good example of character development for him.
I think it's a complex issue that, when you look at it, does have a simple solution. You either get over it and accept that there might be situations in which you have to do it. It's never a good thing, but you have to do it if you're going to protect yourself and the ones you love. Or you can just not do it, period, and you will be taken advantage of by people who are looking to hurt you, by people who are committed to doing it.
After we see Jack and the wolf interact with one another, we get to see the daughters of Aku continue their hunt for him. And the scene that really stood out to me during this part of the episode is when the remaining sisters stumble upon two deers and have no idea what they are. They've spent all their lives in those caves training to kill Jack that they don't know what common animals like deers are. And when the deers start showing affection for one another, it begins to confuse them. I thought that scene was really poignant since it shows that these girls are just as much victims of circumstance as Jack is. But then we get to what I can say for certain is the best part of the episode, and that's Jack's fight with the remaining daughters of Aku. Jack completely decimates the daughters during this battle, using a combination of his environment, the element of surprise, and of course his out-of-this-world combat abilities. He uses the cover of the trees and the snow to take out two of them with makeshift spears, before taking out another one with one of their own weapons. Impaling her on a tree, which is brutal. And once he and the remaining daughters are on a large tree trunk, he drops his weapon and opts to fight them hand to hand, since that would be more advantageous. This fight was not only exciting, well thought out, and well choreographed, but also extremely brutal.
I like the fact that Jack got over the issue of having to deal with killing the daughters of Aku early in the episode, and then once he commits to doing it, he does it, no qualms about it. I mean, I'm sure it'll still come back later in his own thought process, process and reflection, but in the moment, he does it with no hesitation. He just starts destroying them. It was incredible to watch.
Before he fights them, he gives them an ultimatum. Basically, leave him alone or he will defend himself and kill them. And I like how it shows that Jack has not only made peace with the fact that he killed someone, but also that killing people is not something that he necessarily wants to do, but that he'll do it if the circumstances call for it. I just think that was a good example of a show exploring really mature themes like the morality of killing other people. The only daughter at this point that has any real chance of surviving the battle with Jack is Ashi, because Jack dropped her off the tree without killing her beforehand, before he himself fell from that tree in a similar manner. So again, if any of those daughters survive, it's going to be her. I'm really interested to see how this plays out in future episodes. Will Ashi continue to hunt Jack, go back to the cult and face the consequences? Or will she join Jack in the future? Who knows? Maybe it will be all three of these things.
If I can make a prediction,
Yeah.
I don't think she'll go back. I think what'll happen is she was the one originally in the cave showing interest in the outside world more than the other ones. She was the one that was represented as having a little bit of humanity still. I'm thinking that being separated, without the influence of the rest of her sisters or the cult, I think being out in nature, perhaps meeting other people, being forced to be on her own, will allow her to develop that sense of humanity. And then perhaps in the future, if she comes into contact with Jack, maybe then she will reconsider. I do predict that she's not dead. I mean, once again, I've always said they wouldn't bother naming her if they weren't going to do anything with her. And on top of that, Jack fell from the same height as she did, and obviously Jack's fine because you see him you see him in the trailer for the next episode. Obviously he's not going to die in the third episode of the season somehow, because then how would the show continue?
Yeah.
So I think it's very likely that she's still, well, not even very likely, that she is still alive. I'd be incredibly surprised if she wasn't.
Right.
We'll see where she goes from here. Did you notice that the samurai, of course, the image that Jack has of that samurai, this sort of dark shrouded,
the dark
in,
green
the green
samurai,
atmosphere,
yeah. This time it was moving. It was following him.
Yes, this time it was following him, but at the same time, as I recall, in the previous episodes when Jack imagined it, it was taking up the entirety of the screen, while now it was placed as a smaller portion of the whole background. Like he was actually there and the rest of the environment. I don't know if this is perhaps if this is demonstrating in a sort of artistic way that whatever it represents, its influence is becoming more distant to Jack, like he's starting to move away from it. I think it could. Because I think the idea from this episode is perhaps that we're beginning to see more of a commitment of Jack. At the very least, he committed to, defending himself. He committed to self-preservation, whereas in the previous episode, he was thinking about killing himself. It would have been really easy for him to just give up now when he was already bleeding out and just let himself die.
Right.
But he committed to self-preservation, committed to killing the daughters of Aku. So that's perhaps one meaning of that.
This show is really big on imagery and symbolism, so you're probably right that the dark green samurai being in the background but not taking up the entire background probably means that Jack is finally starting to become his old self. He's starting to find purpose again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that goes hand in hand with my thinking that it represents to him some sort of evil, like his potential to dishonor himself. That's what I said it possibly represented before. If that is the case, then I think this is still congruent. It still meshes well with what we're seeing now, if that's the case. Or it's possible it's still something else. But I really think the fact that he shows up in every episode at this point, always during times of self-reflection, that I don't think it's an actual physical entity at this point. I'd be very surprised if it was.
Right.
Whereas before it was maybe, first episode you really had no idea. Second episode was I'm starting to think maybe it's a little more, not something physical. It's a little more, metaphysical, something symbolic. But now I'm starting to feel safer and safer in saying I think it's just a symbolic representation of exactly what I still can't quite put in the best words. We'll see how it unfolds. But I think it's definitely symbolic.
So those are our thoughts on the show. Again, the action was great. The character development was well done. The beginning of the episode had us dying, and we can't wait to see what happens with Jack and potentially Ashi in the next episode.
Looking forward to it, as always.